Hello, it's the Security Weekly News, and it's episode 322. I'm Doug White, and it is the week of 27 August 2023. We've got Mystery, Qakbot, Crates.io, VDP, NetScaler, Entra ID, SynthID, FreeBSD, and more news, along with Jason Wood on this episode of the Security Weekly News.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week, your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for Security Weekly News.
Why does multi-factor authentication have to be a pain for users? It doesn't. Beyond Identity is the most secure MFA on the market and the easiest to use. They ensure that every authentication is multi-factor by default, with phishing-resistant factors that secure access from the start. Beyond Identity safeguards organizations from breaches, data loss, and fraud by eliminating weak phishable authentication factors like OTP and SMS push codes. Go to securityweekly.com/beyondidentity to get a free demo. That's securityweekly.com/beyondidentity to get a free demo today. Are you constantly thinking about how to keep your enterprise as secure as possible? Get to know Chrome Enterprise, the trusted browser for security-conscious professionals like you. Its ease of use for IT and security teams and added access controls protect the remote, extended, and hybrid workforce, keeping your entire enterprise safe. Don't settle for a browser that compromises your organization. Visit securityweekly.com/Chrome Enterprise now to learn more and start protecting your enterprise like never before. Yay, it's the Security Weekly News. All right, I'm Doug White. It's the last week of August, so is this the pumpkin spice edition of Security Weekly News? I don't know. Was pumpkin spice one of those Spice Girls? I'm not sure. They should have had a pumpkin spice. That would have been interesting. All right. Well, the three most popular malware loaders account for 80% of observed attacks. In a ReliaQuest report that said from the 1st of January to the 31st of July this year that Qakbot had 30% of the market, SOC had 27% of the market, and Raspberry Robin had 23% of the market. I'd never heard of Raspberry Robin. That was a new one for me. But Qakbot, if you don't know, was originally a banking Trojan quite a while ago, but it's sort of evolved. It's been one of those things where they release updates and, it's just like a regular, app. But Qakbot has had multiple revisions and has become a top malware loader, which can deploy second-stage payloads, exfiltrate information, enable lateral movement, all kinds of things. So it's a fairly sophisticated tool. Qakbot's typically delivered via phishing emails, and it is associated with Black Basta ransomware group, which is made up of former Conti ransomware gang members. SOC, which is another one that most of you probably heard of, has been around since at least 2018 and is typically deployed in drive-by downloads. So, the oldies are the goodies, but the drive-by downloads, which are typically for SOC, are links to websites that offer fake update software. So this was the one that's behind a lot of this, you need to update your computer right now, click here. SOC has been linked to Evil Corp, which is a typically at least believed to be a Russian-based group. And SOC was being used to conduct a lot of watering hole attacks that leverage the websites of large organizations like Microsoft and Google and other people like that. Raspberry Robin, which does sound like a really unpleasant flavor of ice cream. Like, now with more Robin. Yeah, anyway. Raspberry Robin is a worm that targets Windows machines, which I'm really surprised I hadn't heard of it, but I had to go look it up. But Raspberry Robin has been around since September of 2021, and it spreads via removable devices and has been linked to both Evil Corp and Silence Group. Raspberry Robin has been being used to distribute a whole lot of different ransomwares, including Clop, Lockbit, TrueBot, all the big ones. And the attacks that they were doing with this were primarily targeting financials, government entities, and telcos and manufacturing industries in Europe, which is maybe why I hadn't heard of it as much, because it seems to be more focused in that area, but obviously could be around. The report goes on and says that Gootloader, Chrome Loader, GULoader, and UR-Sniff were also very highly active this year. So they're out there, be ready. Crates.io packet registry was recently targeted in what appeared to be an attack aimed at developers, per a report from Phylum. These types of attacks, I mean, we've seen a lot of these kind of attacks, and they typically go after Node.js or Python developers with typo squatting attacks. And if you aren't familiar with this or you're not a developer, we've seen endless stories about PyPy and other repositories where people typo squat popular packages, like, say Zeek's-garden-123 is named Zeek's Garden 123 without the hyphens or something like that, or just, one letter's different or whatever, and they try to get you, of course, to download the wrong package, and they match these up to very popular packages. Like, how about if random, instead of random, was like RAND0M, and, you might not notice that, and then you've downloaded the wrong library, and you've got this stuff, infecting you. But, whatever the most popular kind of stuff, Qakbot could be like some other spelling of Qakbot. I guess that's like malware on malware kind of crime, I guess. But in this particular case, anyway, Phylum was reporting that the attack was actually made on the Rust package registry, which is crates.io, earlier in August. The Rust Foundation was notified and quickly removed the contaminated packages and locked the account of the person who uploaded them, which won't do much to stop it, but it will at least slow it down temporarily. Phylum said that this was very likely an initial attack and was likely going to lead to more embeds that could exfiltrate information from the downloader. So I guess my point about reporting this story to you was all of us, at least all of us that write code, and most of us do. It's, maybe you're not a straight developer, but you are a pen tester and you write code. We all tend to download things pretty regularly from these repositories today. So you probably want to check these things out pretty carefully. Both the name and the contents of it before you even run it on your dev box. So you may want to put it in a sandbox, investigate it, make sure you downloaded what you thought you downloaded and that it doesn't have a bunch of stuff inside of it. So, and just, my advice. Well, it's been 2 years since CISA decided to centralize bug reporting across the federal government and set up the new vulnerability disclosure policy platform called VDP. This move meant that outside security researchers could safely and legally examine some federal systems and websites and report the findings to the federal government. Wow, what a concept. But, this was old, right? People used to do this back in the 80s and the 90s. I remember contacting a bank and saying, do you realize I was able to dial your bank and get into your bank, with an R login? And, back then it kind of went one way or the other. They either said, great, thank you so much, we'll send you a free keychain that says, bank of whatever on it. And then it sort of flip-flopped, and it started being this kind of like violation of federal law that you could be prosecuted for. And so people that were actually doing this kind of stuff, even if they were essentially white-hatting it, it became a problem. But a new report that came out last Friday said that the VDP program had onboarded 40 different agency programs now and received over 4,091 unique submissions and 1,330 valid vulnerability reports from the public through the end of last year. So it's working. 192 of those vulnerabilities that were reported were classified as critical. So CISA said that 85% of the bugs had been remediated so far, and that on average, it took agencies 38 days to address the flaws that were reported through the program, which is kind of getting into the ballpark of the CISA requirement that critical vulnerabilities be addressed within 30 calendar days of reporting. And obviously, some people are reporting better than 38, and some are reporting worse than 38. So, that was the average. But per the report, the most frequent types of findings were cross-site scripting attacks, server misconfigurations, and data exposures that were being caused by weak encryption or unsecured web apps and so forth. An event that they conducted called Hack DHS, that's if you aren't in the U.S., that's the Department of Homeland Security, which was created after 9/11. The Hack DHS event invited 726 outside researchers to participate and found 235 vulnerabilities, including 40 that were listed as critical across 13 different DHS systems, and they ended up paying out $329,900 in regards to these bug bounties. I mean, it's great. Bug bounties are awesome. And this was a very interesting report of the government being more progressive about, A, letting people explore this, B, letting them report it, and being a lot more interested in sharing this information across agencies. So very useful. It's an interesting article if you're interested in hacking federal things and not ending up in federal prison, or if you're an agency and you really ought to be participating in this. It's a good way to sort of introduce yourself to some of these ideas. In fact, last year, the Department of Justice said that they would no longer pursue prosecution for good faith security research. I'm like, seriously, guys? You're wasting time on good faith security research before? But they were. So common sense seems to be catching on. Like, who knows? Maybe we'll make real progress. Unpatched Citrix NetScaler systems, which are exposed to the internet, are indeed being targeted. Sophos said that Stack 4663, which is listed as an unknown threat group, is suspected to be conducting a large-scale ransomware attack exploiting a vulnerability in the NetScaler ADC and gateway servers, which can allow our favorite unauthenticated remote code execution on that device. The exploit, which we have talked about this previously when this first came out, but it wasn't known to be actively being exploited at the time. But the exploit is a code injection vulnerability, and it now has been observed being used to conduct domain-wide attacks, which include an injection of payloads into legitimate executables such as Windows Update Agent and Windows Management Instrumentation Provider Service, which are both executables that are on your system if you're using Windows and Windows servers. So these are, of course, huge threats. Sophos said that the current attack aligns very closely with an attack campaign that NCC Group Fox IT disclosed earlier this month, which resulted in 2,000 Citrix NetScaler systems being breached. They went on and said that the attacks could be linked to an earlier incident that used very similar techniques, but did not have the Citrix vulnerability to start from. The article does have a link to indicators of compromise, so if you are using NetScaler ADC or these other appliances, you probably should be checking this out right now and making sure that you're patched up before you get got, because obviously somebody's coming. Microsoft Entra ID, which used to be called Azure Active Directory, was analyzed by researchers who found a case of privilege escalation, which could be used by taking advantage of an abandoned reply URL. I honestly didn't know what a reply URL was, but hang on. The attacker would be able to leverage the abandoned URL to redirect authorization codes to themselves and then exchange those codes for access tokens, according to SecureWorks Counter Threat Unit. Now that I immediately, when I saw that redirect word, I said, oh, it's a redirect URL instead of a reply URL. Well, I thought that was something different, but apparently it's the same thing. Basically, when they do this, it leads to a call to Power Platform API via a middle tier service, which they didn't specify, and that leads to an elevated privilege. I mean, it's not really that simple, of course, but the article actually goes through all the grim details of that. It was originally disclosed on the 5th of April, and Microsoft did address this issue via an update a day later after it was reported to them. SecureWorks is providing an open source tool, which I was very interested in, which is linked in the article, so you can go there and find it. But this can be used to scan your organization for abandoned reply URLs or redirect URLs, depending on how you want to talk about those kind of things. But basically, if you don't know what that is at all, a redirect URL is a reference to a location where the auth server is sending the users tokens once they've authorized, once the app has requested authorization and received it. And that auth token is then assigned to the app, and it's sent based on that link. So the auth server sends the token to the redirect URL, which then just bounces it on to wherever it's supposed to go. So if you can manipulate that redirect URL, what happens is you can cause these auth tokens to get sent to you instead of to whomever. So when somebody tries to log in from an account that you know the username and password of, and you rig this, you would actually get the auth token instead of the person who was requesting it, and then you can just go log in. So anyway, this is a very comprehensive article about how these attacks work and how this one in particular works, with a lot of notes about the attack and how it fits into the system. So, I mean, I would say at least ensure that your AAD or your MEI or whatever you want to call it is patched. So however you refer to these things, your Active Directory stuff, or if it's Entra ID is a modern version of it, make sure it's been patched up so that you aren't vulnerable to this attack. One of the basic ideas of artificial intelligence is that it learns. I mean, that's the whole point, right? Well, remember those creepy AI-generated artworks you now have hanging all around your home? Well, I do, but so that's just me. But apparently, and I think we could all attest to this, AI-generated content, deep fakes, and images are getting more and more difficult to spot. They don't tend to have the weirdness that they had in them before. I kind of like the weirdness personally. Watching, an AI-generated picture of Tony Soprano eating spaghetti was pretty weird. But I have one that's called Sunday Service that was an AI painting, and it's really creepy. But I kind of like it, so it's hanging in my house. But as the U.S. start to head towards the silly season of the presidential campaign next year, concerns are that AI can and will be used to generate all sorts of disinformation, deep fakes, and so forth using candidates' likenesses and such. Well, Google released a tool today called SynthID, which it says may have at least some solutions to this problem. So the tool basically embeds a watermark directly into the image that humans can't actually see. Although my mother would have been able to see it. I guarantee you, if I told my mother there was something there, she would have said she could see it, even if I knew that she couldn't actually see it. But she could actually hear light bulbs about to burn out. I'm not even kidding about that. Her hearing was so good, she could hear, like, she'd say the light bulb sounds weird, and it was literally the filament starting to fail. But anyway, if you train an AI to look for this watermark, then the AI can also detect the watermark, of course, and it has to be trained apparently to actually spot whatever this watermarking is. Google said that it was resistant to tampering, so it may be one of the first steps toward policing images and trying to combat disinformation so that political candidates can say, I watermarked this, and AI would detect that it was fake or a deep fake. I mean, this was the original problem with digital anything and why the police didn't use digital cameras for a long time. Because when I first got into forensics, police never used digital cameras. They used Polaroids and they used traditional film cameras because guess what? The courts did not trust digital evidence and might not allow it because it could be fake. Well, Judge Davis hadn't seen anything yet until ChatGPT is called to stand in at the last minute surprise in a twist by, Della Street tracks down ChatGPT and brings it into the court. Boy, that's a dated reference. And no, I'm not that old. They showed those reruns when I was a kid. Perry Mason. If you've never seen that old black and white show, we used to watch it when I was a kid. But anyway, as we all know, it grows easier all the time to create artificial images and deepfake videos. So pretty soon, we're going to need things like this in order to authenticate things and determine if they are. I mean, and this deepfake stuff's been a problem since people were cutting out, celebrities' faces and pasting them onto Playboy images or whatever. But otherwise, it's going to turn into information anarchy. I think it's already kind of happened. So what's worse than information anarchy? I guess information dystopia, informational explosive diarrhea. I think we're at the informational explosive diarrhea, point in time. Yeah, something like that. All right, so I saw FreeBSD on a headline, and I was hooked right then. I mean, I used to use FreeBSD all the time because, I don't know, I like suffering or something, but I always thought it was cool. Leave FreeBSD alone. But in this story, replacing a sort algorithm in the kernel for FreeBSD improved the boot speed by a factor of 100, which that doesn't really shock me that much. I mean, sort algorithms are often very slow. So this whole thing is in an area called micro VMs, which you may or may not have heard of. I'm not sure. The idea of micro VMs is not really new. I mean, back in the 60s, they were talking about stuff like this. But basically, the concept is that it's an OS that's specifically designed and compiled to be run inside of a virtual machine and specifically deal with a specific hypervisor. And I know I use specific twice, but it instead of what a lot of people do with VMs, which is having an OS in the VM that is then has an abstraction layer of fake hardware that it interacts with. So you have to have all these drivers and such. So it's basically a VM that knows it's a VM. I mean, it has no doubt. So the Blade Runner problem is off the table, right? This replicant knows it's a replicant. So basically, you don't need a lot of support options for real hardware like you might have with a regular OS. So they strip all that stuff out. You just need some virtual I/O drivers, which are pre-planned for that specific hypervisor, which means that the hypervisor doesn't have to spend very much energy either, faking a bunch of hardware components for the VM that it may not need. So this means the setup can be small and simple. So the living, breathing example of this is Amazon Lambda. And Lambda, if you're unawares, is a service where you essentially write a function and you put the function in the cloud. And then when your app or whatever needs the function, instead of doing that local computation, it reaches out to the Lambda and pulls the information back down, just like a function is supposed to do. but it's running on somebody else's hardware. Marketing calls this serverless since you don't have to set up a server, I guess, but it's really running on a server somewhere. But Lambda itself runs on what's called the Firecracker hypervisor, which is the basis for the Fargate system as well. So the idea of a micro VM then is that this super fast VM, you can spin it up and spin it down very quickly and use very little resources, and it's super fast and super small, and of course all that saves money in the cloud. So Lambda, of course, is using that very thing. Now Lambda is free unless you use it a lot. But if you want to play with it, you can play with it pretty much for free. But anyway, the point was that this version of FreeBSD was able to load and boot up so fast that they got it down to 25 microseconds compared to the other ones, which were running Linux, which were around 80 microseconds or 1 hour and 12 minutes for Windows XP. But very, very fast boot up time, which of course reduces resource use. Anyway, it's a very interesting area of work. I think was going to have a lot of focus in the coming year as more things shift to the cloud, and that means quick and simple is going to be absolutely what everybody is looking for. Well, his controversial diet book encouraged people to eat grass, paper, and even old tin cans, and it's called Eat Like a Rabbit Goat and You'll Be the Goat. It's rather confusing and apparently quite controversial, but Gwyneth Paltrow said that, quote, after chowing down on some old Del Taco wrappers, I felt my whole life change. Please welcome Jason Wood.
Hey, everybody. Oh, I'm just picturing Gwyneth Paltrow
Eating Del Taco wrappers.
Wrappers
on her podcast.
That'll change your life. That'll, almost certainly. Not saying it's for the better. So I find this area of, watching how governments are trying to do regulation of online platforms to be really interesting. And I thought it was really wild earlier in my career when I was dealing with different state laws, but now we've got different national laws that are rolling around out there. So and I like to comment on these, and you see a lot of hey, this bill is coming up or is being suggested. People are saying that it's a terrible idea, or here's some of the impacts or the concerns about it. Don't see very many articles where they talk about the actual, hey, here's how this is rolling out. But I found an article from last week, actually, by the BBC, discussing the EU's EU's Digital Services Act, which is actually became law back in November 16, 2022. And then on April 25th of 2023, they, as part of the rollout of this, they released a list of what they call very large platforms, which they actually have a numeric quantifier for what that means. It means 45 million users or more. That had to meet the requirements of this bill within 4 months of the April date. And then smaller platforms, everybody else basically has a year to comply with this. So as you can probably guess, the names that you would expect to see in this very large platforms definition are the folks you would expect. Alibaba, AliExpress, all the major app stores or digital stores, Amazon, Google Play, Apple's App Store, etc. Instagram, TikTok, X, aka Twitter, and more. Facebook, right? All of them. So the 4 months are up now, or just about to be, and so this BBC, the BBC is covering what's happened so far. Now, there's some interesting components to this law. Basically, one of the things that I found to be kind of an interesting idea. I'm curious how this is going to be implemented and enforced. But the law requires these technology companies to do risk assessments on the impacts that their platforms may cause to society as a whole. And they have to turn around and report that back to the EU's designated commission on the results of these assessments, and then they have to do something to address those risks. Now, it doesn't say eliminate those risks, but you have to do some mitigation in some way here. Some of the things that they are requiring that these companies address, illegal content. Well, that's not terribly surprising. Risks to rights such as freedom of expression, not being subjected to discrimination, consumer protection, children's rights, things like that. None of those were terribly shocking. They also have to review the risk to public security and elections, which now is where we are seeing more of these platforms. It's been in the news for years now about these platforms being used to interfere with elections. Of course, they're going to be interested in that. Gender-based violence, public health, mental health issues. Those are all things that they're concerned with. And then one thing that could immediately impact the bottom line of these organizations is they're no longer allowed to do targeted advertising to children. Not to say that we can't display ads, we just can't have ads based on what the kids are doing on the platforms. Those ad impressions just got a lot less valuable there because they can only do something generic. Now we're starting to see the results. For example, Meta saw the writing on the wall and said, yeah, we're definitely making the very large platform list. And so they stopped serving ads targeted to kids back in February of 2023, before the list even came out that named them as somebody who needed to comply early. TikTok met the deadline last month. They got that done. Snapchat's also made the deadline. Twitter or X or whatever, they're saying, well, we're on track. We'll get there. Maybe they've just been too busy implementing the most random new product requirements or whatever that Elon's come up with, instead of focusing on this. But they're supposedly on track to get this done within the 4-month deadline. Now, one thing that I did find to be a little interesting, that would be maybe part of this law, was apparently the Digital Services Act has some requirements on how content gets displayed to the users. And in fact, on Facebook in Europe only, users have the option to say, hey, only show me stories and reels from people I follow, and put them in chronological order, who's posted the most stuff, posted recently, which I was like, hey, could we get that here? Because I see some really stupid stuff that I have no interest in when I scroll through this stuff. One of the requirements that definitely got my attention, because this is kind of the secret sauce, the technology platforms have to give regulators in the EU information about how their algorithms actually work, for how ads are displayed, or how they're displaying stories to people, and how are things appearing in people's feeds. Now, I was quite surprised at this, just because this is kind of these companies tend to be pretty protective of that sort of stuff. So, but yeah, they have to put it out there and let the EU get a look at that. There's been discussions about this for years. In particular, the algorithms doing stuff like, hey, let me show you a story that's going to really piss you off, because that's guaranteed to get some engagement happening here, and get people angry at everybody around them. There's no information reported about what these algorithms are yet, but I expect to see more of that, particularly as the law requires them to give this information out to independent researchers, who I assume are vetted in some way, for them to review. Somewhat amusingly, Amazon and another retail platform named Zalando, which I wasn't familiar with, have taken legal action to prevent them from being classified as a very large platform, because Amazon's not very big, apparently. Amazon's reasoning is there's other retailers in the EU who are bigger than them, so we don't have to comply with this, or not comply with it. We don't have to meet the 4-month deadline. They're going to fight with it. You're going to end up having to comply with it anyway, because it's going to affect everybody. So I'm not sure what they're doing here, or why they're going for this. Like I said, you have to have more than 45 million users. There you go. It's not a comparison thing between you and your competitors in the area. But whatever. I'm interested in seeing how the risk assessments are going to go, and how the regulators respond to that, and what gets released to the public from that. How is the EU going to enforce this? They do have the ability to do some fines. In fact, the law enables the EU or this commission to order a platform to just shut down if they feel that they're not complying with the law and just resisting and being a pain in the rear. So they got a pretty big enforcement stick there, but I would expect that this would be very, very rarely tried to be enforced on somebody. But I do wonder, how does this work? I mean, we're here with this cross-border thing where we've got technology services that are based in other countries, but, of course, are accessible to anybody with an internet connection. What happens if a company gets told you need to shut down because you're ignoring us, and they just like, yeah, well, screw you, we're going to continue ignoring you, and what is the EU going to do about this? Are they going to be able to put pressure on the host country to do something to enforce this? I don't know. It looks like the big platforms, at least, or with this law, are willing to comply without too much fuss, which is not to, the same can't be said for like the UK's online safety bill, which I talked about back in July 25th, I believe. I think it was episode 312, where, the companies there are pushing back on that one pretty strongly. So in this case, everybody's just kind of rolling along with the program. But with that bill, which hasn't become law yet, the tech platforms are saying, no, we're not going to comply with this, or we're going to take down services rather than try to comply with the requirements of this bill, which is going to get pretty noisy if these companies actually carry out their responses. But so anyhow, so there's some results of how some of this regulation is going down. I thought it was just kind of interesting, and there's something to watch. Again, I want to see how these risk assessments turn out and what the results are there. Well, as we prepare to say goodbye to August and move into September here in the U.S., we've begun the annual tradition of going back to school. And as usual, there is much weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth. And that's just Doug's reaction to the situation. The students seem to be holding together pretty well, it seems. So let's go back to Doug and see if he can wrap up the episode without throwing a chair over the desk or assaulting somebody with a box of crayons.
You left out heavy drinking, which is a part of that whole process.
I would imagine so, but I just didn't want to bring up the image of you up in the front of the class, just boom with a bottle of whiskey on the desk and be like, all right, I think I can do this.
I literally had a class one time where the guy said, if I pass out, class is dismissed. And that was pretty regular. So he would just sort of slump over. He had a big thermos full of scotch that he drank during class. So it was quite interesting. He was actually a really smart guy, though, but he was later got fired for that kind of behavior. So, yeah, that was not at Roger Williams University, mind you. That was when I was in school. So I'll leave it to you to figure that part out. Thank you, Jason. And finally, a mysterious, and I always want to work for a company described as mysterious. I mean, that's my goal. I always work for companies and people go, oh, yeah, that. I want them to be like, ooh, that's weird. But a mysterious company is buying, I don't know why it's mysterious, is buying up land in Northern California. Apparently, the company has spent around $800 million, which is what Elon Musk calls my bar bill or something like that. But they're apparently buying farmland in the Solano County area of Northern California, which if you don't know where Solano County is, it's around Travis Air Base, which is just northeast of San Francisco. But apparently they bought around 52,000 acres. So that's like, 22,000 hectares. That is between Fairfield and Rio Vista. So if you're from that area, you know where those places are. If you're not, you don't know. But anyway, after years of this, the mysterious plans have been revealed that a brand new city will be built upon the farmland. The quote said that the backers of the project, quote, wish to create a community with tens of thousands of residents, clean energy, public transportation, and dense urban life. No way that sounds like a cult, but Flannery is the name of the company, and it's incorporated in Delaware, like almost every company is, and it has backers in the tech industry in Silicon Valley, up to and including Laureen Jobs, who is the widow of, Steve. But the backers apparently are trying to generate local support in these small towns by putting up ballot initiatives to create the new city, to create new homes, to create a large solar farm, orchards with millions of new trees, and then thousands of acres of parks and open space. Sounds pretty nice. I visited a place like that in China once. But the claim is that private sector billionaires can, of course, run things better than the government hacks. I don't know about that, but, and if there's billionaires, won't there have to be people who service the billionaires, the people who donate blood to them and clean up after them and make sure that everything is spotless and all their little weird quirks and whims are being met, that kind of like, they want the blades on the helicopter to rotate counterclockwise, that kind of stuff. I mean, if they cut me in on the high-end stuff, I could probably live in that fiefdom. But, I mean, I'd probably get stuck having to clean Elon's toilets or something, or wipe down the mirrors or whatever, or make sure the mirrors are covered so Elon can't see his reflection. I will see. Maybe buy some land near there and run an escape tunnel business. And, I know. I'm going to sell Dr. D's guaranteed cure-all panacea solution. It's made out of opium, Red Bull, and gin. And it's in a really hipster-looking retro bottle from the 19th century. And, you get a free day pass to Dr. D's Sanatorium and Recovery Center, which provides yogurt enemas, ice water plunges, and fish slapping until you all completely dry out. I mean, we'll be rich, I tells you. What could go wrong? And that's the news. Thanks, Jason Wood, and we'll see you on Friday.